Lima, Peru. In the seaside capital, the tales of graft were multiplying like the potholes. There was the unfinished highway to the airport that had left a trail of indictments and protected witnesses instead. There was the light rail line that prosecutors say was built with $8 million in bribes. Not even the statue of Christ the Redeemer standing above the ocean was untouched. It was donated as a gift by the Brazilian construction giant that had doled out the bribes. The company, Graft, has been at the center of Latin America's biggest corruption scandal in a generation, with government officials jailed in Ecuador and Brazil and dozens under investigation in Venezuela and Colombia. In Peru, the scandal may be taking down its biggest figure yet, President Pedro Pablo Kuczynski. Peru's Congress is set to open impeachment proceedings against Mr. Kuczynski on charges that he improperly received $782,000 from Graft through a company he owned. The president admits to receiving the money but says he did nothing wrong. On Thursday, Mr. Kuczynski will have 60 minutes to defend himself before the country's Congress. His critics say they could oust him by the weekend and that they have the votes. It is the latest in a wave of corruption charges that has roiled the region, and appears to have signaled a turning point. For years, many Latin Americans ruefully accepted corruption to be as inevitable as voting itself, as officials from the presidential palace to the mayor's office enriched themselves from public coffers. Roba, pero hace optas, he robs, but he builds, in Spanish was a common refrain. Now, politicians are on the run in some cases literally. Alejandro Toledo, who served as Peru's president in the early 2000s, remains at large after being indicted by prosecutors for having accepted $20 million in payments from Graft. Another former Peruvian president, Ollantaytamala, and his wife, Nadine Heredia, are in jail awaiting trial. In Ecuador, a former vice president was sentenced to 6 years in jail for accepting payments. President Kuczynski's case, however, highlights a dilemma haunting many of the investigations: how to oust politicians in governments where few judging them are considered any more clean and in some cases far less so. In some ways, Mr. Kuczynski's case echoes that of Dilma Rousseff, Brazil's former president, who was impeached in 2016 for having manipulated the federal budget to conceal economic problems. At the time of her trial in Congress, scores of lawmakers were under investigation themselves. Her successor, Michel Temer, narrowly avoided an impeachment trial for corruption. As in Brazil, they're not pursuing corruption charges to clean Peru of corruption, they're using the charges to remove their enemies from power, said Jo Marie Burt, a political scientist who studies Latin America at George Mason University in Virginia. The charges against Mr. Kuczynski have been aggressively promoted by Keiko Fujimori, a right-wing politician who lost to Mr. Kuczynski in 2016.